The planet was quiet, almost too quiet. Dust swirled across the barren landscape, and jagged rocks jutted out like teeth from the cracked ground. No birds sang, no wind carried any scent other than dry metallic dust. A small human crew had landed here just hours ago, their shuttle kicking up clouds as it settled on the uneven terrain. They were explorers, sent to chart the edges of known space, but even seasoned travelers could feel the weight of the emptiness around them. There was something about this place that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. Among the crew, one person noticed it first. A movement in the distance, swift and unusual. At first, it looked like a shadow dancing on the rocks, too small and quick to belong to a human or a machine. As they focused, the shape became clearer. It was a creature, but unlike anything they had ever seen. Its body was sleek and covered in strange fur that shimmered under the planet's pale sun. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting intelligence and awareness, not mindless instinct. It moved with precision, like it knew every inch of this harsh terrain. But what caught the explorers off guard wasn't just the creature itself. It was the little ones trailing behind it. 3 smaller shapes, wobbling and unsure, followed the larger creature. They were her cubs. Their fur was patchy, thinner than the mother's, and their steps were unsteady. They stumbled over the rocks, squeaking softly, and the mother wolf, or what appeared to be a wolf, kept glancing back to make sure they stayed close. Every now and then she growled softly, a sound full of warning and fear. The humans whispered among themselves. They had seen dangerous creatures before on other planets, but this was different. This was not a hunting pack, not a colony of aggressive predators. It was a family struggling to survive in a world that seemed determined to reject them. Yet something didn't feel right. The mother wolf and her cubs were alone. No other beings were nearby. No alien companions, no signs of a structured group. They had been abandoned. The humans could see it in the way the mother moved, in the way her body twitched at every sound. She was wary, exhausted, and desperate. The cubs clung to her, their tiny bodies shivering in the dry wind. It was clear that they would not survive much longer without help. The crew debated quietly. Some argued that they should leave the creatures alone. They are dangerous, one said. We don't know what they are capable of. What if they attack us? Another pointed out that interfering could be risky. They are not our responsibility. Survival comes first. Their logic was cold, practical, and understandable. After all, the universe was not known for kindness and resources were limited. But one human, who had been standing a little apart, watching the wolves with quiet intensity, felt differently. They could not turn away. There was something in the mother's eyes, a silent plea, a fragile trust that had no place in such a harsh world. It tugged at their conscience, pushing against the rules of caution and survival. The human stepped closer to the others, voice calm but firm. We can't just leave them. Look at them, they are not just animals. They are alive. They are suffering. If we do nothing, they will die, and that is something we can prevent. The team hesitated. The human's words hung in the air like a weight, forcing them to reconsider. There was a strange tension between reason and empathy, between fear and compassion. The mother wolf was dangerous, yes, but she was also cornered, scared, and alone. The cubs were defenseless. Watching them now, it was impossible not to feel a pang of sorrow. Hours passed, and the humans observed from a safe distance. The mother wolf searched for food, but the barren planet offered little. She sniffed the air, her nose twitching, and prowled around the rocky terrain, growling low when the wind shifted or when shadows moved unexpectedly. Her cubs tried to mimic her movements, clumsy and weak, tumbling over rocks, whining softly each time they fell. Every so often, the mother would stop, nuzzle them gently, and push them forward again. It was a rhythm of survival, but one that seemed destined to fail if no help came. The human who had spoken first began to gather supplies, quietly moving away from the others. Water, food rations, and protective gear were gathered into a small pack. Every step felt heavy, every movement careful, as if the planet itself was watching and judging their actions. They knew the others might not approve, but they could not ignore the suffering before them. Finally, after long minutes of careful approach, they were close enough to see the wolves clearly. The mother's eyes met theirs. For a moment, the universe seemed to pause. There was fear, yes, but also recognition. Something unspoken that passed between species, something that transcended language. The human knelt slowly, offering a ration of food. The cubs squeaked, unsure, but the mother hesitated only briefly before allowing them to approach. This first contact was delicate. The human did not reach out to touch the mother, did not make sudden movements, but simply sat, offering food and space. The cubs approached first, their tiny noses twitching at the strange objects. Slowly, one took a bite, then another, and soon all three were eating. The mother circled warily, keeping one eye on the human and one on her cubs. She did not growl, did not flee. She watched, alert but cautious, as if assessing whether these humans could be trusted. The hours stretched into a day. The human stayed nearby, observing every movement, every glance, every twitch of fur. The mother wolf rested more, her body relaxing slightly as she allowed the cubs to eat and play. There was a fragile peace, a quiet understanding forming between human and alien wolf. It was a beginning, tentative and uncertain, but a beginning nonetheless. That night, as the planet's dim light faded into a cold darkness, the human kept watch. They did not sleep, choosing instead to monitor the wolves. The cubs huddled close to their mother, trembling occasionally in the alien chill. The mother shifted and growled softly whenever the wind changed or a shadow moved, but she did not attack. She seemed to recognize that the human was no threat, and in this small, silent acknowledgement, a bond began to take root. Somewhere in the distance, faint shapes moved on the rocky hills, but the wolves did not notice them. For now, survival depended on patience, understanding, and an unexpected choice, a human deciding that life, even when dangerous and alien, was worth saving. By the end of the first day, the human realized that what they had begun was more than just a rescue. It was a moral experiment, a test of empathy in a universe that often offered none. The wolves were abandoned, left to die by their own kind, but humans had intervened. The outcome was uncertain. The planet was harsh, resources were scarce, and the aliens who had left these creatures behind might not have done so for no reason. But in that moment, under the strange alien sky, a simple truth became clear. Compassion could exist even at the edge of space, even on a planet that seemed determined to destroy all life. The wolves had a chance now, not because they were strong or cunning, but because one human had seen their suffering and refused to turn away. And as the night deepened, with the cold stars twinkling faintly overhead, the human knew that this was only the beginning. The real challenge, winning trust, surviving the planet, and facing whatever dangers lay ahead, was still to come. But for the first time, there was hope. The wolves, once abandoned and doomed, had a chance to live, and that chance rested entirely on the choices of one human who had decided that life, in all its forms, was worth saving. The morning light stretched across the barren planet, casting long shadows over the rocky landscape. The human watched the wolves as they moved cautiously through the terrain. The mother had grown slightly more confident since yesterday, her steps firm, her head held high, but the cubs were still unsure. Every small movement, every sound of wind or falling rock made them stumble or squeak in alarm. The human kept a careful distance, watching, ready to intervene if danger came too close. Inside the small human shelter, the rest of the crew gathered quietly. Some were skeptical of the decision to help the wolves. "We shouldn't waste resources on them," one muttered, pacing back and forth. "We have limited supplies, and we don't even know if they are intelligent enough to survive." Another voice argued, quieter, but just as firm. "Maybe it's not about intelligence. Maybe it's about life. If we can save them, why shouldn't we try?" The human who had begun feeding the wolves stepped forward. "They are struggling. They are alive and they need help. That's all that matters. If we turn our backs now, they will die." Their words were calm but carried a quiet strength that could not be ignored. Slowly, the rest of the crew nodded, though the tension in their faces showed they were not entirely convinced. Outside, the mother wolf had discovered a small patch of alien plants that could be eaten. She sniffed cautiously, letting the cubs taste first, nudging them forward with gentle movements. The cubs hesitated, looking back at her for guidance. Their mother's patience was unwavering, though her eyes reflected exhaustion. The human watched this silently, noting every gesture, every glance. There was intelligence here, careful thought and instinct balanced with care. Hours passed as the humans observed the wolves' behavior. The mother taught the cubs simple survival skills: how to sniff out edible plants, how to move quietly across the rocky ground, and how to avoid hidden dangers. The cubs stumbled many times, tripping over rocks or startling at shadows, but their mother never scolded them. Instead, she nudged them, growled softly as a warning, and continued moving forward. The human felt a growing sense of responsibility. These creatures, abandoned by their own kind, had no one else to rely on. The humans could turn away, leave them to their fate. But that choice had already been made yesterday. Today the wolves depended on them. The thought was heavy but clear. Compassion had consequences, and now they had to follow through. Later, the human approached the mother wolf more closely, carefully placing a few rations of food near her. The mother froze, ears twitching, eyes narrowing, but she did not run. The human remained calm, speaking softly, almost instinctively, in a tone that carried reassurance rather than command. Slowly, she allowed the cubs to approach first, then herself, taking the food cautiously. The trust that had begun yesterday deepened slightly, but it remained fragile. As the day continued, a strange wind swept across the planet, carrying with it fine particles of dust and the faint scent of something unfamiliar. The cubs whimpered, pressing against their mother. The human stepped in closer, shielding them from the wind. The mother wolf growled softly, a sound filled with warning and hesitation, but she did not attack. She watched the human carefully, assessing intentions, and it seemed that the silent communication between them was growing stronger. The human realized that they were not just helping the wolves survive physically, they were also teaching them to trust. And trust was fragile, easily broken. One wrong movement, one careless word, and the mother could turn aggressive. But patience, empathy, and respect were slowly building a bridge between two completely different species. Meanwhile, the human crew explored the surrounding terrain. They found signs of the alien beings who had abandoned the wolves, strange footprints, broken structures, and faint traces of energy that hinted at a civilization far more advanced than anything the humans had encountered before. The evidence was troubling. Why would such an advanced species leave creatures so vulnerable to die? Were the wolves experiments? Failed pets? Soldiers that had been discarded? The thought made some of the humans uneasy, and they debated whether it was wise to stay. But the human who had formed the bond with the wolves refused to be swayed by fear. They watched the mother wolf and her cubs, and something inside them hardened, a determination to protect these creatures no matter what the aliens' reasons might have been. The decision was no longer about logic or caution. It was about doing what felt right. That evening, a sudden tremor shook the ground. Rocks fell and the cubs scattered in panic. The mother wolf barked sharply, rounding them up and guiding them to a small rocky alcove. The human moved quickly, helping where they could, lifting a fallen rock to clear a path and offering a protective presence. For the first time, the cubs hesitated less, looking toward the human for guidance. The mother allowed it, growling softly as if to say, "I trust you, but only enough to help, not to interfere." The crisis passed quickly, but it left a mark on everyone. The human realized that survival in this world would not be easy, not just for the wolves, but for the humans as well. Every choice carried weight, and every moment of inaction could be fatal. Yet, in the midst of danger, the bond between species was growing stronger. It was small, fragile, but undeniably real. Night fell, and the planet's twin moons cast pale light across the rocks. The human sat near the wolves, keeping watch as the cubs huddled close to their mother. She relaxed slightly in their presence, and the cubs, sensing safety, eventually drifted into a light sleep. The human could feel the exhaustion in their bodies, the weight of responsibility pressing down, but also a quiet satisfaction. This was meaningful work. Not just survival, but the act of choosing compassion when the universe offered none. The next day brought new challenges. Strange sounds echoed across the rocky plains, low hums and distant rumbles that suggested something moving in the distance. The wolves became alert, ears twitching, eyes scanning. The human joined them in cautious observation, learning the patterns of their behavior. They discovered that the mother had instincts far sharper than any human could hope for. She knew the land intimately, detecting dangers long before they appeared. The human began to rely on her, following her cues and learning to read her signals. Despite the growing trust, tension remained. Some crew members argued that the wolves were unpredictable. They could attack at any moment, one said. "We have no control over them. We don't even know if they are intelligent or just clever animals." The human who had formed the bond listened but remained firm. "We don't need control. We need understanding." That is the difference between fear and compassion. As days passed, the human continued to feed and protect the wolves, but also began to observe their intelligence more closely. The mother wolf could solve problems, guide her cubs through dangerous terrain, and even anticipate threats that the humans had not noticed. It became clear that the wolves were not merely animals. They were survivors capable of thought, learning, and emotion. The cubs, too, showed early signs of intelligence, mimicking their mother and experimenting with the alien environment in cautious, curious ways. One afternoon, while exploring a nearby canyon, the human noticed that the mother wolf had grown bold. She approached a small pool of water, carefully inspecting it before allowing the cubs to drink. The human observed her behavior, marveling at the way she assessed risks and protected her young. It was not just instinct, it was strategy, awareness, and care. They realized that the mother wolf had been abandoned not because she was weak, but perhaps because she was too clever, too independent, or too different from what the aliens expected. By now, the humans had begun to understand the gravity of what they were doing. Saving these creatures was not simple. It was dangerous, exhausting, and filled with uncertainty. But the reward was clear, witnessing life struggling against impossible odds and helping it survive. There was a satisfaction deeper than any scientific discovery, a quiet fulfillment in the knowledge that one small act of kindness could alter the course of survival. Night fell again, and the planet grew cold. The human remained near the wolves, keeping watch while the cubs slept. The mother curled protectively around them, eyes flicking toward the human every so often. It was a silent acknowledgement, a tentative bond that said, "We trust you, for now." The human felt a mix of pride and humility. These creatures, once abandoned and doomed, had found a chance to survive because someone had chosen empathy over fear. And as the twin moons reflected off the jagged rocks, casting long shadows across the barren landscape, the human realized that their journey had only begun. The challenges ahead would be greater, the dangers more threatening, and the tests of trust and compassion more intense. But for now, they had taken the first steps in a fragile alliance, one that could mean the difference between life and death for a family of wolves abandoned by the universe. The human closed their eyes briefly, listening to the soft breathing of the cubs and the low growls of the mother wolf. The planet was harsh, unforgiving, and full of unknown dangers, but in this small moment of quiet there was hope. Life had a way of surviving, even in the most unlikely forms, and sometimes it took a human's choice to give it that chance. The morning sun barely touched the rocky landscape when the human began their routine of checking on the wolves. Overnight, a faint frost had settled over the barren planet, coating the jagged stones and rough ground with a cold, crystalline sheen. The cubs were huddled tightly against their mother, shivering slightly in the chill. Their tiny bodies seemed even more fragile than the day before, but the mother wolf had shifted her body to shelter them, her fur bristling with protective instinct. The human knelt a short distance away, speaking softly in low tones, offering small pieces of food for the cubs. Today was not just about survival, it was about trust. The mother wolf watched carefully, her eyes calculating, measuring every move. Slowly, she allowed one of the cubs to approach and nibble at the food. The others followed, tentative but encouraged by their siblings' courage. The human felt a sense of relief. Each small act of acceptance built a fragile bridge between species, a bond that was growing stronger with patience and care. But it was not easy. The cubs were clumsy and easily frightened. Every sudden gust of wind, every shift of rocks caused them to squeak in alarm. The mother would circle them, growling softly, and correct them gently when they strayed too far or ventured into danger. Watching her, the human realized how much intelligence and strategy went into her protective behavior. She was not merely acting on instinct. She was thinking, learning, and planning, all while keeping her vulnerable cubs safe. As the human observed, they decided it was time to attempt closer contact. They moved slowly, hands open, and sat on the rocky ground a few meters from the mother. She did not retreat, but she did not advance either. Instead, she kept her eyes fixed on the human, gauging intentions. The cubs peeked out from behind her legs, curiosity battling caution. The human extended a small piece of food toward the mother, not touching her, just offering. The wolf sniffed it, then looked at the human, almost as if testing their intentions. Finally, with a low, cautious movement, she accepted it. The moment was delicate but significant. The wolf's acceptance of the food was more than hunger. It was a sign of tentative trust. The human's heart lifted. This small victory was a reminder that survival on this planet was not just about enduring the environment. It was also about forming bonds, building trust, and understanding life in a way that went beyond fear. Later, the human ventured slightly farther with the wolves, observing how they navigated the alien terrain. The mother moved with precision, avoiding loose rocks and hidden crevices, guiding her cubs carefully. Every now and then she would stop, sniffing the air, ears alert to the faintest sounds. The human followed, learning to read her signals, when to move, when to pause, when danger might be near. It was a silent communication, unspoken but powerful, teaching lessons of awareness and caution in a world that offered no second chances. The cubs, meanwhile, were slowly learning from both their mother and the human. They tried to mimic the mother's movements, attempting to step lightly over rocks or peek cautiously around corners. When they stumbled or squeaked, the human would gently guide them back toward safety, always careful not to frighten them. Over time, the cubs began to show signs of confidence. They explored a little farther, tested their balance, and occasionally interacted with the human by touching a hand or sniffing cautiously. As the day wore on, the human noticed something else. The mother wolf was beginning to show signs of recognition beyond simple trust. She would occasionally glance toward the human and adjust her movements, taking calculated risks to allow the cubs access to food or safe paths. It was a form of cooperation, a subtle acknowledgement that this human was part of their small survival plan. The human marveled at the intelligence and strategy at play. These wolves were not just animals, they were thinking, planning, and adapting. But challenges were never far away. Around midday, the ground trembled slightly, a warning of the unstable terrain. The human and the wolves froze, ears and senses on high alert. The mother immediately gathered the cubs, urging them toward a small overhang where rocks could shield them from falling debris. The human assisted where they could, moving loose stones and helping the cubs maintain balance. The tremor passed, leaving a few scattered stones and startled cubs, but no serious injuries. It was a reminder that this planet was unforgiving, and survival required constant vigilance. By afternoon, a storm began to form on the horizon. Dark clouds rolled in, carrying sharp winds and alien particles that stung the skin. The human knew that they had to act quickly to protect the wolves. They guided the mother and cubs to a small cavern they had discovered previously, a temporary shelter that could provide some protection from the storm. The mother was cautious, growling softly as they approached, testing for hidden dangers. Once inside, she curled around her cubs, shielding them as the wind howled outside. The human watched, admiring her patience and careful planning. Inside the cavern, the cubs finally began to relax. They nuzzled against their mother, their small bodies calming in her protective presence. The human offered water and food, and the mother allowed the cubs to feed first, taking her own share after ensuring their safety. The storm raged outside, but inside, there was a fragile sense of peace, a small oasis of survival and trust in a planet that offered no mercy. It was during this calm that the human noticed something remarkable. The cubs began to play, nudging each other gently, experimenting with the food, and even showing curiosity about the human. They were learning, not just from their mother, but from the human as well. This interaction was subtle yet profound. Life was adapting, bridging species, forming connections where none had existed before. The human realized that the survival of these creatures depended not only on strength, but on collaboration, trust, and empathy. As night fell, the storm subsided, leaving the cavern cold but quiet. The humans stayed close to the wolves, keeping watch as the cubs slept, their tiny forms huddled against their mother. The mother relaxed slightly, ears twitching occasionally at distant sounds but no longer tense. The human felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a weight of responsibility. This bond was fragile, and the planet's dangers were only going to grow. Every decision mattered. Every moment of care or caution could mean the difference between life and death. Over the next few days, the human continued to build trust and strengthen the connection. They learned to recognize subtle cues from the mother wolf, the flick of an ear, the position of her tail, the way she shifted her weight, and respond accordingly. The cubs became more adventurous, testing boundaries and exploring the rocky terrain under careful watch. Together, the human and the wolves formed a small, unlikely family, navigating a harsh world through cooperation and understanding. One day, while scouting the surrounding area, the human noticed signs of other alien life. Strange tracks appeared in the dust, leading toward the cavern where the wolves were sheltered. The mother immediately became alert, her body tense, growling softly. She positioned herself between the cubs and the human, a clear signal that any threat would first have to go through her. The human felt a surge of respect and admiration. Trust had been earned, and now it was time to test it. The encounter was brief but tense. Small alien creatures, perhaps scouts or remnants of the species that had abandoned the wolves, appeared at the edge of the cavern. The mother stood firm, growling and baring teeth while the human remained calm, observing. The alien creatures hesitated, clearly recognizing that the wolves were not alone. After tense moments, they retreated, leaving the wolves and the human unharmed. It was a small victory, but it reinforced a critical lesson. Trust and courage could face dangers even greater than instinct and fear. By the end of this part of the journey, the human realized something profound. These wolves were more than just abandoned creatures. They were intelligent, adaptable, and capable of forming bonds across species. The human's role was not simply to feed and protect them, but to guide, understand, and coexist. Every day was a test of patience, empathy, and courage. But each moment also revealed the potential for connection in a universe that often seemed indifferent. As night fell once more, the human sat with the wolves, listening to the soft sounds of breathing and distant echoes from the rocky plains. The cubs were asleep and the mother's body relaxed slightly, leaning against the human in a gesture of trust. The human reflected on the journey so far. Life on this planet was harsh and unforgiving, but small acts of compassion, careful observation, and mutual respect could change the fate of even the most abandoned and vulnerable. The human knew the real challenges were only beginning. The planet was still full of dangers. The aliens who had abandoned these wolves might return, and the environment itself was relentless. But for now there was hope, a fragile, tentative hope built on trust, courage, and the quiet bond forming between human and wolves. And as the stars shone faintly over the barren landscape, the human realized that this was not just a story of survival. It was a story of connection, empathy, and the choice to act when no one else would. It was a reminder that life in all its forms had value, and that even in the most unlikely circumstances, compassion could create a lifeline for the abandoned and the vulnerable. The morning air was crisp, almost painfully sharp. As the humans stepped outside the small shelter they had built with the wolves, the barren planet stretched endlessly, its rocky terrain harsh and unforgiving. Yet there was a strange beauty to it. The way the twin suns reflected off the jagged rocks, the quiet hum of distant winds, and the fragile life that stubbornly survived in such a harsh place. The human glanced at the wolves, who were moving with cautious grace. The mother wolf led her cubs, each step deliberate, protective, and wise beyond measure. Today was different. The human could sense a shift in the air, a tension that was not there before. The mother wolf's ears twitched constantly, her nose lifted, sniffing something far beyond the human's comprehension. The cubs clung to her, sensing their mother's unease. The human followed carefully, staying close enough to help if needed, but far enough to let the wolves act naturally. Trust had grown over the days, and now the human had become part of their world, moving in sync with the rhythm of survival. As they moved through the rocky plains, the human noticed something remarkable. The cubs were beginning to explore more confidently, testing their balance over loose stones and strange alien vegetation. The mother corrected them gently when they wandered too far, sometimes nudging them with her nose or letting out a soft warning growl. It was a delicate dance of teaching and learning, and the human marveled at the intelligence and care at play. These creatures were not just surviving, they were adapting, thriving in the only way they could. The peace, however, was fragile. A distant rumble shook the ground, sending dust spiraling into the air. The human froze, watching the mother wolf immediately gather her cubs and lead them to a small rocky outcrop. Her movements were precise, calculated, and protective. Every instinct she had honed over the days was now on full display. The human moved alongside her, helping to clear the path and steady the cubs. It was a silent teamwork, unspoken but effective, showing how much trust and understanding had been built between species. Soon, they reached a narrow canyon, the shadows long and sharp. The mother paused, sniffing the air and listening to sounds imperceptible to human ears. Her body tensed, ears flicking back and forth. The cubs pressed close, and the human instinctively raised a hand to reassure them, though the gesture was more symbolic than necessary. The wolf's caution was enough to guide everyone safely through the narrow path. As they progressed, the human noticed signs of other alien life, footprints, broken structures and faint traces of energy lingering in the rocks. These were remnants of the beings who had abandoned the wolves, leaving them to survive alone in this harsh environment. The human's heart sank. They had already felt a connection with these creatures, but now the weight of responsibility grew heavier. The planet was not just dangerous in its natural elements. It was also a place where other intelligent beings had left the wolves to die, for reasons unknown and likely cruel. By midday, the human decided it was time to explore a nearby ridge that promised a broader view of the surrounding terrain. It was a risk, but one that could provide vital information. The mother wolf seemed to understand and led the way, moving with caution. The cubs followed closely, stepping carefully over sharp rocks. The human walked beside them, careful not to disturb the delicate rhythm of movement they had established. Every step was calculated. Every glance exchanged a form of communication that went beyond words. From the ridge, the human could see how desolate the planet truly was. Jagged mountains stretched into the distance, and strange formations of rock and dust gave the landscape an alien, almost hostile feel. Yet in the midst of this, the wolves were small but powerful forces of life. They moved with intent, protecting each other, and now, protected by the human as well, they had a chance to survive where so many others would fail. But danger was never far. A shadow passed over the ridge, moving faster than the human could follow. The mother wolf froze, ears twitching, her body low to the ground. She barked softly, a warning that made the cubs huddle together. The human scanned the area, heart racing. Something was coming, something alive, something that posed a real threat. The cubs whimpered softly, their trust in the mother and the human palpable. Suddenly, a pack of alien predators appeared, moving swiftly and silently toward them. Their bodies were sleek, sharp, and clearly designed for hunting. The human froze, knowing that any sudden move could provoke them. The mother wolf stepped in front of her cubs, growling low, her stance protective and unyielding. The cubs pressed close, trembling but safe behind her shield. The confrontation was tense. The human watched as the mother assessed the predators, calculating her next move. Her intelligence and courage shone through. She was not just acting on instinct but strategy. Slowly she moved forward, teeth bared, eyes sharp. The predators hesitated, clearly recognizing that these wolves were not easy prey. The human remained still, letting the mother lead the defense. For the first time, it became clear how vital their bond had become. Without the human's presence, the wolves might have acted differently, perhaps less strategically, and the cubs' lives could have been at risk. After tense moments, the predators retreated, perhaps deterred by the human's presence and the mother's fearless stance. The relief was immediate. The cubs relaxed slightly, their mother keeping a watchful eye. The human approached slowly, offering water and food as a reward for surviving the encounter. It was a small ritual, a reminder that survival on this planet required both courage and care. Over the next few days, the human worked even harder to strengthen the wolves' survival skills. They guided the cubs through difficult terrain, teaching them to navigate loose rocks, detect dangerous predators, and find food and water in the barren environment. The mother wolf observed, correcting them gently when necessary, and even seemed to approve of the human's methods. Trust had grown to a new level, not blind trust, but a careful understanding that this human was an ally. One afternoon, while exploring a distant valley, the human noticed faint signs of alien structures. Strange towers and walls, partially buried in dust, hinted at a civilization that had once thrived here. The human's mind raced with questions. Had these beings been cruel to the wolves? Had they abandoned them intentionally, or had circumstances forced their hand? The answers were unclear, but one thing was certain. The wolves were survivors, and now they had a human who refused to let them fail. The human also observed the wolves' emotional growth. The cubs were no longer timid. They played, explored, and even interacted cautiously with the human. The mother tolerated their growing independence, guiding them but allowing them to experiment with the world around them. It was a delicate balance of freedom and protection, and the human realized that the wolves were teaching them as much as they were teaching the wolves. But peace was temporary. One night the ground shook violently, more intense than before. Rocks fell from the cliffs and dust filled the air. The cubs screamed in panic, pressing against their mother. The human acted quickly, helping guide the cubs to safety, supporting them as they struggled to maintain balance on the unstable terrain. The mother wolf led decisively, her intelligence and courage evident as she navigated the danger. Together, Human and wolves survived the tremor, but it left a lasting impression. Survival on this planet was never guaranteed, and every day brought new challenges. As the storm subsided, the human reflected on the bond that had grown between them. These wolves, once abandoned and left to die, had become allies, teachers, and friends. The human had learned patience, courage, and empathy in ways they had never imagined. Every risk taken, every moment of care, had strengthened the fragile connection between species. By the end of the day, the human, the mother, and the cubs settled in a sheltered area, exhausted but alive. The mother curled protectively around her young, occasionally nudging them toward the human, a subtle sign of trust. The cubs were content, tired from exploring and learning. The human sat quietly, listening to their breathing, feeling a sense of fulfillment that was difficult to put into words. This part of their journey had revealed a profound truth. Life, even when abandoned and left to struggle, could survive when met with empathy and understanding. The planet remained harsh, the dangers relentless, but together human and wolves had formed a fragile but unbreakable bond. Survival was no longer just about strength, it was about trust, care, and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. And as the twin moons cast pale light over the rocky landscape, the human knew that more challenges awaited. The bond between them and the wolves would be tested further, but for now they had survived together, learned from each other, and proven that even in the harshest conditions, life had value and hope. The next morning, the human woke to a silence that felt heavier than usual. The winds that usually swept across the barren planet were still, and even the distant rumbles of shifting rocks were absent. The mother wolf and her cubs were quiet as well, huddled together in their small shelter, ears flicking at every minor sound. Something in the air felt different, a tension that made every movement deliberate and cautious. The human decided to explore the area around the shelter to see if there were any changes in the terrain or potential threats. As they walked, they noticed unusual markings in the dust, tracks that were not made by the wolves nor by any known creatures on the planet. The human knelt to examine them, their mind racing with possibilities. These tracks were fresh, leading toward the shelter, and they suggested intelligent movement. The human's heart sank. Could it be the aliens returning? Or some other predator drawn to the presence of the wolves? The mother wolf's behavior confirmed the human's fears. She paced restlessly, sniffing the air, growling low in her throat. The cubs pressed closer to her, trembling slightly. The human moved closer, placing a hand on the mother's shoulder in reassurance. She looked at the human, eyes filled with both wariness and trust, as if silently asking, "Are you ready?" The human nodded. They were ready, and they would not abandon these creatures now, no matter the danger. Hours later, the threat became clear. A patrol of alien beings, humanoid but clearly more advanced than the wolves or humans, appeared on the horizon. Their movements were coordinated, precise, and deliberately searching. The human could see their intent. They were not here to observe or explore. They were here for the wolves. The mother growled, low in warning, gathering her cubs behind her. The human crouched beside them, devising a plan. Retreat was not an option. The wolves could not outrun them alone, and hiding would only delay the inevitable. The confrontation was tense. The alien beings approached with weapons that emitted faint pulses of light, scanning the area, searching for signs of life. The mother wolf positioned herself between the cubs and the humans, growling fiercely. She was no longer just defending. She was strategizing, using the terrain to her advantage, placing herself in choke points and forcing the aliens to proceed cautiously. The human understood this instinctively, following her lead, helping where possible by signaling safe paths and creating minor distractions with thrown rocks. For a long moment, the aliens paused, seemingly assessing the situation. Then one of them stepped forward, speaking in a strange, harsh language. The human could not understand the words, but the tone was clear, commanding, dismissive, and cold. The wolves did not retreat. The mother stood her ground, eyes blazing, her body tense but controlled. The human felt a surge of respect and fear simultaneously. The mother's courage was astonishing, but the odds were not in their favor. Suddenly, one of the cubs squeaked and darted forward, startled by a pulse of light from an alien device. The mother reacted instantly, lunging forward to shield the cub, teeth bared and body low. The aliens froze, clearly surprised by the wolf's aggressive but controlled response. The human acted quickly, positioning themselves to block the cub's retreat while keeping out of the mother's path. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos, a careful dance of survival. The human realized then why the aliens had abandoned these wolves. Perhaps they had been considered dangerous, unpredictable, or too intelligent to control, but what the aliens had failed to understand was the bond forming between species, the power of trust and empathy. The wolves, guided by instinct and the humans' careful intervention, could fight and survive in ways the aliens had never anticipated. The standoff lasted hours. The human and the mother wolf moved in sync, guiding the cubs and avoiding direct confrontation as much as possible. The aliens tested the defenses, probing with devices and cautious movements, but every attempt was met with strategy rather than brute force. The human observed the wolves closely, marveling at their intelligence and adaptability. These creatures, abandoned and left to die, were proving themselves capable of incredible resilience. As the sun began to set, the human noticed a change in the alien patrol. Their movements became less aggressive, more hesitant, almost as if they were reconsidering their approach. The human did not know why, whether the aliens recognized the intelligence in the wolves, or whether they were simply calculating the cost of further engagement. The mother wolf did not relax, nor did the cubs, but the tension in the air shifted slightly. Survival had been earned, but the danger was not over. Night fell, and the aliens withdrew, leaving the human and wolves in temporary safety. The mother wolf circled her cubs, ensuring they were unharmed, while the human carefully checked for injuries. The cubs were trembling but safe, and the mother nuzzled them gently, her body relaxing slightly. The human sat down, exhausted but alert, reflecting on the events of the day. It was clear now why empathy and trust had been so critical. The human had not simply saved the wolves from hunger or cold, they had given them guidance, strategy, and hope. The mother's decisions had been bold and intelligent, but without the human's intervention, the cubs might not have survived the alien confrontation. It was a fragile victory, a reminder that life on this planet demanded both courage and collaboration. Over the next few days, the human worked to strengthen the wolves' defenses and survival skills. They taught the cubs to move quietly, recognize danger signs, and follow the mother's cues without hesitation. The mother wolf continued to lead, but now she also learned from the human's interventions, how to navigate terrain more safely, how to anticipate threats, and how to use the environment to protect her cubs. The bond between human and wolves had deepened into mutual reliance, each learning from the other in ways neither could have anticipated. One morning, while scouting a nearby canyon, the human discovered something astonishing: evidence of alien technology, partially buried in the rocks. Devices that could detect life, energy sources, and communication tools that hinted at a civilization far more advanced than anything the humans had encountered. The human realized that the aliens who had abandoned the wolves were not careless. They were calculating, leaving the wolves to survive as a test or perhaps as a punishment. But the human had changed the outcome. The wolves were no longer abandoned. They had allies, guidance, and a chance to thrive where the aliens expected them to fail. As the day progressed, the human noticed that the mother wolf was increasingly bold. She ventured farther from shelter, encouraged the cubs to explore more, and even began to observe the aliens' technology from a safe distance. It was clear that she was learning, adapting, and preparing for challenges that had once seemed insurmountable. The human felt a mixture of pride and awe. This wolf, once abandoned and doomed, was now a strategist, a protector, and a teacher for her cubs. But the peace was fleeting. One evening, the human detected unusual energy readings near their shelter. The aliens were returning, perhaps to finish what they had started. The human acted quickly, guiding the wolves to a more defensible location, a small cave system that offered protection and a vantage point. The mother wolf assessed the area, positioning herself and the cubs strategically, while the human prepared minor defenses using rocks and debris. When the aliens arrived, they were cautious, aware that the wolves and the human were prepared. The standoff was tense, each side waiting for the other to make a mistake. The mother wolf growled low, her body tense, ready to defend her cubs at all costs. The human stayed calm, guiding the cubs and observing the aliens' behavior. Every move was critical. One wrong step could cost lives. Hours passed, and finally, the aliens retreated once more, perhaps deterred by the intelligence, strategy, and unexpected courage displayed by the wolves and the human. The cubs were safe, the mother wolf remained vigilant, and the human allowed themselves a moment of quiet relief. Survival had been earned through courage, trust, and empathy, and the bond between human and wolves had never been stronger. As night fell, the human sat with the wolves, reflecting on the events. The aliens' return had shown why these creatures had been abandoned. The universe was harsh, indifferent, and often cruel. But the humans' intervention had changed their fate. The mother wolf and her cubs were no longer victims. They were survivors capable of facing dangers that had once seemed impossible. The human realized that empathy was not weakness, it was strength. By choosing to act, to protect, and to trust, they had altered the course of survival for an entire family. The wolves had shown intelligence, strategy, and courage beyond expectations, and the human had learned lessons of patience, observation, and moral responsibility. Together they had created a fragile alliance that could endure challenges the aliens could not anticipate. And as the twin moons rose over the jagged rocks, casting long shadows across the barren planet, the human knew that the ultimate test was still ahead. The aliens' intentions remained unclear, the terrain was harsh, and the dangers were relentless. But the human and the wolves had survived together, learned from each other, and proven that even in the coldest, most indifferent corners of the universe, empathy, courage, and trust could create life-saving bonds. For the first time, the human felt a deep sense of purpose. This was no longer simply A-B. The morning dawned pale and quiet, with the twin suns barely breaking through a thin haze over the barren planet. The human stirred, glancing at the mother wolf and her cubs who were huddled together in their small shelter. There was a calmness this morning that had not been present in days. The tension from the alien patrols and constant survival struggles had eased, but the air still carried a lingering weight. Everyone, human and wolves alike, knew that the universe was harsh and peace was fragile. The human stepped outside and scanned the horizon. The landscape was as desolate as ever, but from afar, there appeared to be something unusual. A distant glow, faint but steady. Curiosity and caution mixed in the human's mind. Could it be a sign of other survivors or perhaps a clue to the aliens' intentions? Either way, it was an opportunity that could not be ignored. The mother wolf sniffed the air, ears twitching, sensing the human's unease. She had grown more aware, more in tune with the human's moods and intentions, and for the first time, it seemed the human was reading her as much as she was reading them. The cubs were playful and energetic, darting around the shelter, exploring the rocks and small crevices. Their movements were careful, guided by lessons from both their mother and the human. It was incredible to see how much they had changed since the first day. The timid, frightened pups were now curious, confident, and alert. The human knelt, letting the cubs sniff their hands and even allowing one to climb briefly onto their lap. It was a delicate bond, but it felt natural, built on trust and shared experience. As the human considered the glow on the horizon, a faint vibration ran through the ground. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the mother wolf stiffened instantly. She gathered her cubs, positioning them behind her, and the human instinctively mirrored her stance. The vibrations grew stronger, accompanied by a low hum in the air, a sound that was alien, unnatural, and unmistakably threatening. The human's mind raced. The aliens were coming again, but this time it felt different. Their approach was deliberate, calculated, and more aggressive than ever. The standoff began long before the aliens appeared. The mother wolf paced slowly, circling the cubs and the human, eyes sharp and attentive. The human noticed her strategy. She was guiding them to higher ground, positioning them where the terrain offered protection and an advantage. Every movement was precise, every glance communicated instructions to the cubs. The human followed closely, aiding where they could, but always careful to let the mother lead. Trust had reached a level where the wolves and human were no longer merely companions. They were a team, each depending on the other for survival. When the aliens finally emerged, the human and the wolves were ready. The alien figures were larger and more imposing than before, with devices that pulsed with energy and weapons that could strike from a distance. Their goal was clear. They had come for the wolves. But the human could see something in their behavior. Hesitation. Perhaps they had underestimated the wolves' intelligence and the human's determination. Perhaps they had realized that this was not a simple hunt or retrieval. Either way, it gave the human and the wolves a fighting chance. The mother wolf stepped forward, growling low, her body tense but controlled. The cubs pressed close behind her, but their nervous energy had transformed into cautious alertness. The human took a deep breath and moved alongside them, prepared to act but leaving the wolves to dictate the strategy. For hours, the confrontation was a tense dance of movement and strategy. The aliens probed, testing weaknesses, but the wolves and the human responded with intelligence and coordination. The terrain became an ally. The jagged rocks, small cliffs, and narrow passes were used to block the aliens' advance and protect the cubs. During the standoff, the human realized why the aliens had abandoned these wolves in the first place. They had underestimated them, considering them weak, expendable, or irrelevant. Yet here they were, alive, alert, intelligent, and resilient. The mother wolf's courage and the cubs' rapid learning had transformed them into a formidable presence, and the humans' careful guidance had amplified their survival skills. This was not just instinct fighting for life. This was strategy, courage, and adaptation at its finest. As the day wore on, the confrontation reached a critical point. One of the cubs stumbled on the rocky terrain, causing a brief moment of panic. The mother lunged instinctively, shielding the cub with her body. The human acted simultaneously, using a piece of rock to block the path of an alien scout. It was a split-second decision, executed with precision, and it worked. The cub was safe, and the mother wolf gave a low, approving growl. In that moment, the human understood the depth of the bond they shared. The wolves were not only trusting them, they were relying on them, just as the human relied on the wolves. Hours later, the aliens withdrew. Their departure was cautious, signaling a reluctant acknowledgement of defeat. The human and wolves had survived, not through sheer strength alone, but through coordination, intelligence, and the unspoken bond they had formed over the past days. Exhausted but unharmed, the group retreated to a safer location, a small cave system that had proven defensible during previous encounters. The mother wolf circled her cubs, making sure they were safe, while the human quietly arranged food and water for everyone. That night, the human sat near the wolves, watching the cubs sleep. The mother lay protectively around them, occasionally lifting her head to observe the surroundings, ears flicking at every sound. The human reflected on the journey so far. These creatures had been abandoned, left to die in a harsh world, and yet through courage, empathy, and persistence they had survived. The human realized that compassion had been the key, choosing to act when others would not, offering guidance and protection without demanding obedience or control. Over the following days, the human continued to strengthen the alliance. The cubs became more confident, exploring farther from the shelter and testing their newly learned skills. The mother wolf encouraged independence while maintaining protective oversight, showing a remarkable understanding of teaching and guidance. The human observed this with awe, realizing that life could adapt, learn, and thrive in the most unlikely circumstances when given a chance. One afternoon, the human discovered something extraordinary while exploring a nearby canyon. A faint signal of life or energy, possibly from other survivors or a hidden alien outpost. It was a chance to understand more about the aliens' intentions or perhaps find allies. The mother wolf approached cautiously, sniffing the air and assessing the situation. The cubs watched attentively, mimicking their mother's behavior, showing how quickly they had learned to navigate threats. The human felt a deep sense of pride and responsibility. The wolves were not only surviving, they were learning, adapting, and thriving in a world that had once left them for dead. By the final days on the planet, the human and wolves had formed an unbreakable bond. The mother wolf had grown to trust the human fully, even allowing the cubs to interact more freely. The cubs were no longer timid. They played, explored, and responded to subtle guidance from both mother and human. Every step of this journey had reinforced a simple but profound truth. Survival was not just about strength. It was about connection, trust, and the willingness to act when others would abandon hope. The human often reflected on the aliens' abandonment. Perhaps they had seen the wolves as disposable, a test of resilience or a failed experiment, but the human's choice had altered the outcome. By choosing empathy over indifference, courage over fear, and patience over impatience, they had given life where it had been all but extinguished. The mother wolf and her cubs had survived against impossible odds, proving that even in the harshest conditions, life could thrive when someone chose to protect it. As the twin moons rose over the jagged terrain, casting long shadows, the humans sat with the wolves one last time before preparing to leave. The cubs slept, huddled safely against their mother, while she lay protectively around them, occasionally lifting her head to watch the surroundings. The human felt a mixture of pride, sorrow, and hope. Pride for what had been accomplished, sorrow for the challenges that remained in this harsh world, and hope that the wolves would continue to survive, grow, and perhaps thrive, even without human presence. The final moment was quiet but profound. The human knelt, offering a soft hand to the mother wolf. She sniffed it, then nuzzled it gently, a gesture of trust, respect, and acknowledgement. The cubs stirred slightly, their tiny noses brushing against the human's hands. It was a simple act, but it symbolized everything they had achieved together: survival, trust, and the bond between species that had been abandoned and yet had endured. The human knew their journey on this planet was ending, but the lessons remained. Compassion had the power to change fate. Trust could bridge even the most impossible gaps between species. Courage and patience could turn desperation into hope. And even in a universe that often seemed cruel and indifferent, life could survive and thrive if someone chose to act, to protect and to believe. As the human walked away, leaving the wolves to their world, the mother wolf and her cubs watched silently from the shelter. The bond they had shared was unspoken but undeniable, a connection forged in the crucible of survival and strengthened by trust, empathy, and courage. The cubs were no wall.